My name is Reza Ganjavi, and this is Kevin Fitzmaurice. And what is your name?
Jesse Boyd.
Jesse. If you like to say your names, feel free. You don't have to.
Katie.
Katie?
Ron.
Ron?
You can even lie.
Christy?
Brittany.
Sanford.
Tanya.
Nakia.
Will.
I thought we'd take a few minutes after this yoga class and talk about some deeper questions of living which are not often discussed in our educational system, in our daily lives. Many subjects that are very important aren't often discussed. Things like looking within, being aware. How many times have you heard as you went through school to be aware of your thoughts and feelings? They've taught you a lot of math and science, but this aspect was missing. And this leads to, this subject of awareness leads to what's really important, it seems, which is a movement in life, which is also somewhat ignored. If I can quote Rumi, he said, "Come out of the field of time and join the field of love." So he's talking about these two fields. There may be even more. We're conditioned to think in duality, but there is a field, it seems to me, which is so important, so vital, so fresh, so alive. If I can use some words to describe it, I would call it life, love. It's a timeless movement which encompasses everything, which is so much there. And then there is another movement, which is the common movement in the world, which is what we know very well because we're thinking all the time. And our culture is based on this thought-dominated way of being. And thought has its purpose in life. You know, you have these beautiful buildings in downtown, we know how to go to the moon. These are all the products of thinking. But our educational system and conditioning and habits have made us thinking machines, made most people thinking machines. So we think too much about things that are even not the right place for thought. So thought enters every corner of our being in most people. And it's a tool, right? So for practical and technical tools, it makes sense. It's a great tool. But when we apply it psychologically, for example, we're misapplying a tool, like brushing your hair with a toothbrush, and we run into problems. We run into confusions, misery, suffering, and so on, and conflicts, which we see around us in the world, which seems to me to be the product of a misuse of thought. So I think part of the art of living is to find the right place of thinking, where the mind learns itself. Like, I don't eat meat. After a while, I go to the grocery, after some time of not eating meat, and I don't eat sugar, and I don't eat chocolate as much as I like it. So when I go to the grocery store, my mind knows where it can go and where it doesn't go. I don't have to really make so much effort. Similarly, the mind learns where thinking belongs and where it doesn't belong. And this really opens up a lot of doors psychologically, because in areas where it doesn't belong, thinking doesn't enter. So it's quiet. It doesn't make images. What does he think about me? What does he think about himself? And what do I think about myself? This dominant process which bogs us down, creates so much misery and pain in our lives, you know, this whole process of image making, for example. All this just quiets down. Then we don't need psychotherapists and a lot of the specialists to help us get out of this mess, because we're not creating the mess to begin with. Please feel free to comment.
I concur. It's the battle of the head versus the heart. In the Western society, we're all about the head. That's the one that rules, and we don't realize that the real guide is the heart. The head is just the tool to implement that in the material world. And unfortunately, we get so absorbed with the material world being reality and the head being one in control that we often totally forget, completely cut out the role of the heart. And that's what gets us into a lot of the trouble. And I think rediscovering that the heart is the true guide. I mean, even the ancient Egyptians, you know, they took out the heart and put it in a, what are those things called? They actually preserved the heart, but they pulled the brain out of the nose and threw it. Sarcophagus, yeah. No, the sarcophagus I thought was what the body went into. Anyway, one of those things.
Bell jars.
Right. They actually knew that the heart was a vital organ that was important, but the brain, they just tossed it. Like, okay, they knew something.
They pulled it out through the
they've
nose, I
forgotten,
believe.
and tossed it, yeah, something, or maybe used it to
Tastes
paint
like
it
eggs.
something, I don't know. So, yeah.
Right.
Do we all agree that's the problem? Do people not agree?
Hmm.
Do people think there's not enough thinking in the
That's too much thinking to ask if you agree or not. I mean, really, you either resonate with it, you feel like, or, I don't know.
Right.
No, I like that. I like that.
I noticed I've had a lot of worrying and chattering in my brain for a long time before getting into yoga, where I can slow it down a bit. But like, you know, there was always times where I'd be like just in thinking, and I wasn't really doing anything. I wasn't really producing much more than suffering, you know, reasons to suffer, reasons to not do something, reasons to go against myself and others, you know. Yeah.
Right. So I think mankind throughout history has seen this, has seen the beauty of having a quiet mind. And it's devised methods and systems to make it quiet. And in the modern day, we have also devised systems like psychotherapy and so on, which I'm not discarding, but I know far too many people get more confused by it than get helped by it. So these approaches, if you examine them, it seems like they all rely on the on control in some form, you know. So thought is too dominant. I should be more heart-centered. I'm thought-centered. What do I do? Try to quash thought. But what I've learned is that control is out of the picture. It's a way of life. Imagine a way of life where control is out of the picture, which means it just doesn't mean you're running around and doing, you know,
Back
like
to the 60s.
Right. It's not that, but it means there is no division between controller and the controlled. A way of life in which there is no division, which means you're living in unity. You're friends with yourself. There is no one part of you wants to do this, another part wants to do something contradictory. So if you examine those conflicts, they're usually conflicts between what is and what should be. And when we understand this, then we can stay with what is, but also the root of conflict is in the process of thought itself, because thinking is mostly based on memory, knowledge, experience. And experience is limited. And therefore thinking, most of the stuff that we think about is limited. Even if we think about the future, it's a projection of what you already know. So thought is in a very limited space. Also thinking, arguably, is material. He has a very nice theory, and there's a great biologist who thinks maybe it's more than that. But as far as I can see, when I think, there's a material process in my brain. It's stored in memory cells. So what is material is limited. So thought is limited. What is limited divides. And where there's division, there's conflict. Maybe this is going too fast, and I don't want you to accept this.
But why does thought interfere? Why does thought interfere?
Okay, nature of thought itself is divisive because it's important for the tool that it is. Like in physics, for example, we needed to break things down, divide them into atoms and so on, molecules and so on.
Right, but
So
if you're not
understand-
using the knives, that you don't get cut. So
Right.
why are you using thought? What's prompting you to use thought?
Survival.
Hmm?
Survival. Survival.
Survival's causing you to use thought?
I don't-
Survival of?
Existence in a material world. If we believe that this is all there is, we focus on the mind as how we operate and function within this material world. But if we know that this is an illusion, that there's more beyond this, that there's something greater out there that we're pulling our energy from, our life force from, our eternal connections from something higher, then we aren't limited anymore, and we don't see everything as just how the mind has to, you know, make money, have food, get to work, you know, avoid predators or, you know, bad weather or whatever. We realize that we're infinite, we'll be provided for, we have all we need, we're serving the purpose, and to just trust and go with it. You know, that's I think back to what you were saying of the field of thought versus the field of love, you know, putting it back into the realm of what's in control is in the heart, and the mind is a tool to discriminate what it has to be in this
You
this
had
field
something.
of materialism.
You had something to offer?
I don't know if thought is so much the problem as dwelling on the thought. And just like anger is not a problem, it's an emotion. It comes out of us naturally, but you feel it and you let it go. If you have thoughts and you dwell on them, that's where the illness comes from, at least for myself. And if you can't let those thoughts go and surface naturally and then serve their purpose and move on, that's where we lock ourselves into prisons of thought.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think thought isn't the problem. I think it's how you use thought that becomes the problem.
Like giving continuity to something. Somebody calls you a name, you might get angry, and you can just finish with it and move on. Or you can go, well, if I would have punched him, da 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 da, if he had done that. So this is thought giving it continuity, which causes more fear and anger and so on and so forth.
But why is it giving it continuity? Thought isn't motivated to do that by itself.
Well, when the mind learns that this is not even the place for thought, in my life this doesn't happen, because my mind has learned that it just doesn't go there, it just shuts off. Not by force or will. There's another way of life where there's no will. How nice it is, and there's no effort.
We all have to learn what makes us, what practices in life make us feel good and which don't make us feel good. Like if we didn't know that refined sugars and, these manipulated fats are bad for us, we would just keep eating them because they taste good. But once we learn to not eat meat or to not eat these sugars, then our brain actually says, wow, that doesn't make me feel good when I eat it. Or maybe we can observe ourselves and notice it, but if you notice that holding on to these thoughts makes you ill and makes you not well, like today, I suffer from anxiety where I have physically made myself ill from being trapped in my own thoughts, which I'm only recently realizing, but today I could come here and realize that my thoughts are making me physically ill and let it go, and now I can pursue.
I think that's absolutely true, but I don't think that's thought's intention. I think that's ego's intention.
Yeah.
I think your ego gets thought to do those wrong things. I think your ego says, first you get angry because somebody stepped on your foot, and then ego says, well, who are they, and why should they do that to me, and who do they think they are better than me, and I'm better than them, and I'll show them. That's all ego. And it's using thought. Thought is the tool of ego. I don't think it's thought's fault, but thought is certainly the tool of ego. And ego uses it very well and very extremely and constantly. But I don't blame thought for that.
Thoughts turn. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Thoughts turn into things, and if you dwell in this fear space, fear is another word for fear, or is false evidence appearing real. And if you get caught into that space of what motivates you, or is it fear that motivates your action? I think to some degree the survivability that we're humans, we're different than many other animals because we think. There's more thought that but there's basic thought, like I've got to build a fire because it's cold, or I'm going to build the biggest skyscraper in the world, or do something so, or I'm going to get close to God now. That's my intention, but I need to stay warm, or I need to provide for my family, or there's levels of things.
So what's helped me along the lines of what you're saying to distinguish between practical areas and I call it psychological areas. So for practical areas, yes, thought is needed, and this distinction really helps me a lot. Where my mind has learned in the psychological areas, it's just thought doesn't go. It just stays quiet. I don't need to create images and all those things that could lead to confusion and so on, because that's not the right place for thought. But coming back to what that lady and this nice lady were saying, we can realize that thought, misused thought, or thought used in a wrong place can cause problems. So what do we do? What I was trying to say is that traditional systems of meditation and so on, and the modern systems, they all to talk about some form of a controlling, managing of thought. But what I've learned is that emptying is very important. Not to quash thought, but to understand it. Let it tell its story. So for me, writing helps a lot. If I'm troubled, I write it. This writing is a way of emptying. You just look at everything, and eventually you empty out. There's nothing else. A new thought comes, oh, I've looked at that.
Empty is very scary for ego.
Well, yeah, because it challenges the very existence of ego.
It does.
We have many thoughts during, at least, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm really enjoying the discussion. I wish I could stay longer, but I can't. So
Prior commitments,
one-
understandable.
Only one thing I would like to add to
Oh,
it.
please add, please add.
Before I go, I have this card over here I want to take. And
Please add, Stanford.
that is a wise man said to me once, more than once. A thought is a thing. You are what you think, and you become what you think about most. Thank you.
Beautiful.
Peace.
Send me an email.
As far as thoughts, thoughts come to our head all day long, and we have to decide what are the thoughts we're going to act on, or what are, and you need to be in constant remembrance. Constantly. Are you going to look through the dirty lens, or are you going to look through the clear lens? Dirty.
Maybe you can write off the lens.
Well,
Well, and back to this idea that in meditation you quash thoughts. There are some forms of meditation, and one I'm particularly in, that says, no, that gives it power and it forces itself back. And so you just kind of ignore it. You just let it go by like a cloud, or just
Yeah.
let
Ignoring
it be
is a
there,
meditation strategy.
and then let it do its
It
thing,
is.
like you say.
But
Maybe
does it
observe
work?
it, but let it. Don't give power.
Works
to
for
it.
getting tranced. It really
yeah,
does.
but does it bring a fundamental change?
A trance might seem very fundamental.
Well, what you were saying about writing down the thoughts, like that, instead of letting
Hangs on
it
to
stay up in your head, when you write it, it becomes concrete, something you can observe, which might be easier to do than just sitting there and observing your thoughts. Writing it down, you can actually see like what you're writing, and it just puts a distance between you and it.
So
Yeah.
releasing it.
Store it as well, and look at it later.
Yeah, but the thing
Put
is
it in a
that,
box.
Except I rarely ever look
Burn
at
it.
my thoughts on paper.
look, I know people who practice TM, for example. Their house is a mess, their life is a mess, but they sit down quietly and they try to have an orderly mind. It doesn't work.
Meditation.
So,
How do you
so,
know?
so meditation and life are connected. The inner and the
What was
outer
your
are
question?
connected.
How do you know?
I know
How do
that
we
because
know?
I've been to the room and I know it's a mess.
But how do we know that outward messiness is anything to be worried about? It sounds like a judgment of the mind.
Well, it seems like...
Sounds like my desk.
Well, but the thing is, these thoughts that come in your mind, there's a reason for them. Yeah, maybe we can say some of them are mechanical, some of them are for whatever other reasons. But one of the main reasons that I've discovered thoughts that come to my mind are because of some either disorder or something that needs to be done. So my mind goes, oh, I need to do that. So when I catch it...
But who's telling it needs to do that?
Well, if I have a doctor's appointment, for example, which I forgot to write in my calendar, then as a,
Yeah, but who's telling you that that's important or that even matters? If you're 5 years old, there's nobody telling you, so it doesn't matter.
There you go.
sorry, I don't understand the question.
Anybody understand the question? Say it better?
Yeah. Why are we putting any validity on these thoughts being important? Why? If we're saying that thoughts are things we get too attached to and they control our lives too much, and thoughts are things we need to learn to put them in their place or let them go, then why is it that you're saying that when these thoughts come that we need to address them all? Maybe we don't need to.
Maybe not all of them. I'm just saying that this in reaction to schools of thought which promote ignorance or control. That okay, just they come, let them go. let them go. But maybe they're trying to say something. That's my only point.
Mm.
Well, and again, you have to decipher what are the thoughts worth acting upon or worth occupying your time, or this thought is animal magnetism, it's wrong, you know. So the one that says, you stepped on my foot, so I need to react. That's the wrong thought. We have the ability to judge between, hey, this thought of anger, that's not going to occupy my mind. It's a mistake. It's error. Kevin stepped on my foot. That's okay.
But
It's only an accident. I can let it pass. It's
And
error. I can forgive him.
I think it's important to see what's the origin of the thought and to go deeper into what brings this thought. Is
That's
it my
that's
own
where I am with it.
yeah, that's
You
what I was
know,
trying to say
Sure.
also.
entanglements in past relationships that cause these issues, and therefore I'm going in circles, not resolving something.
That's why when you write it down, eventually you see it and you can slowly go back to the root of it.
See
And
the
one
pattern.
experience in your life that left such an impression that it's coming back because it skips over that gaps, the
And I think
electricity.
few
So
people
Freud isn't
analyze
dead after
themselves
all.
that way, but that's very important.
So Freud
It's a
isn't
more-
dead after all.
Right,
Yeah.
Freud.
So how do you
Oh,
do that
Freud.
without psychotherapy?
Well, excuse me. But what you're saying, in fact, is the same thing that I was saying. I used the doctor appointment as a very crude example, but it could be anything. It's to pay attention to anything, whether it's a scream of your mother that you hear, or whatever it might be, the kind of thing that you're describing. So,
His mother.
what was your name?
Christy.
Christy.
Mhm.
Christy was saying the analysis. You asked, how do you do it without psychotherapy? The
Yeah.
question is it really analysis, or is it just attention?
That you're giving the thought?
Yes.
Now we come to a very important
The
thing.
self creating the thought. What is it about the self that's
Yeah.
making that thought come?
And why does
Oh,
the
yeah.
ego need thought?
Because that's how it lives.
Discernment.
That's its
judgment.
air, that's its food, that's
Yeah.
its water. Has to
Building blocks.
So how do you shut it down, or how do you switch the...
Freedom.
Well, it's
Thought.
important for survival.
Stop
It's
it.
Do we
true.
want to shut it down? Do we really
Yes.
want to? Because if you don't really want to, if you don't really want to, and we're just discussing that we want to, nothing will happen. You have to, do you really want to shut it down? Do you see it as a
Well, how do
crisis?
you-
Do you see it as an urgent thing to shut down? Like a fire in your house?
Sometimes, yeah. I mean, how do you get it to change or not affect you so much?
But you are it. See, that's the whole thing.
But
No.
you, the word within itself, you are it, not the one that's observing who you are.
The
you know?
witness.
But is it really
So is
an
the observed separate from the observer?
Is that actual separation or artificial separation?
I've
'Cause
yet to separate them. I just continuously witness and watch and observe myself, and
So who's watching
still
when you write
trying.
your thoughts? Who's watching
It's-
when you write
it's
down your
still
thoughts?
the ego. It's still this construct of what I am, and I've yet to step back far enough, I guess, to peel my face out of the mask.
But maybe there is no separate entity. Can we see without a seer? Can we go for a walk? We're listening to the birds. We're looking at the trees. There is no listener. There is no seer.
Then how do you hear
as
the
a
birds?
separate,
I think
Then how
as
do
a
you hear the
separate
birds?
entity.
How do you hear the birds?
When you reach a
How do
higher
you
level
label
of
them as
human spiritual evolution, I think you become one with it all. I mean, to not sound completely out of the... I think that there are things that I don't understand with my mind and my ego can't accept, and yet there's a part of me that's like, oh yeah, okay. Maybe that is how it is. That right now the ego and the mind wants to divide everything up, put one thing here and one thing there, call this that and call that the other, blah, blah, blah. When really, we all are interrelated, interconnected, complexly formed, and way beyond any of our ability to truly comprehend. The brain just can't get it. And the
Right.
ego is just some little thing trying to grasp this little bit of power in this minute little material world to just help us to get from one day to the next of this repetitious and maybe suffer-filled world. I don't know how to say this.
Maybe the ego
And
is a
the thing
construction.
is that when we let that go, when we realize that okay, this is the little part of me that's suffering right now, and I'm saying mean things because it just makes me think I'm going to feel better, but I know in the long run it's not. And you just keep going through it and bashing your head and realizing that, okay, something's got to change and it's going to have to be me, and the ego's not getting me anywhere. And I let this little thing go, and I realized that at some point you kind of rise above that and you realize, yes, that you are something infinitely bigger and better and different, and you can't even begin to figure out what it is or put a word on it or even describe it or even,
Because it's
the
beyond,
ego can't even grasp it.
it's beyond thought.
Yeah, and so you just go, screw it. This is what it is, and what is right, and you just keep moving through it. And it's
That's like Reza was saying earlier, some areas it doesn't let thought go. That sounds like what you're saying.
Yeah, so maybe we just don't need to go there.
What's your name, sorry?
Tanya.
Tanya was asking how to get rid of the ego, if I can put it in crude words, right? Is that roughly the... And then your reaction, Christy, was that...
I thought you were saying that, you weren't?
You thought I was saying that?
Shutting down the ego.
Shutting, yeah.
Shutting down the ego.
Yeah.
Oh, keeping it for other times, I see.
Yeah. Maybe.
I think you just need to have pity on the little thing and realize it's just squirming around trying to be in control, and it's not.
Yeah.
Our ego, like everything else, I think, serves a purpose, and we have to recognize what that purpose is. Like our ego, from the minute that we're born from our mother, helps us determine like where my body ends and what I can feel in my toes, and I can't feel your toes, but I can move my leg, and I can have my thoughts, but I can't read your thoughts. And so ego like helps us define what I have control over in this world. But until we can recognize that your well-being also affects my well-being, and that my well-being affects your well-being, then we can't begin to extend our ego barriers. I mean, if we can recognize that as a whole, our well-being is interconnected, then we can start to extend this ego barrier outside of my physical body. And I don't know, I've never personally been able to reach other people's thoughts or some universal consciousness that I know of, but I guess that's the goal and end. But I think that's the way to minimize ego, is not to look at it as a bad thing, but to realize its purpose and to use its purpose, but to realize that the greater good is also our good. And so when we're trying to do ourselves good by only thinking about this physical body, then we actually end up a lot of times doing ourselves harm. And so it's not that this ego is a problem, but we're thinking of ourselves only in this physical body is what does us the problem.
I
Because our
hear you
greater
talking
well-being,
about selfishness rather than ego myself.
maybe.
Well, I don't know. I think that was well put. I don't know what else is ego other than sort of not necessarily selfishness, but the small s, awareness of the
It can be
little self, not
defined
the
many,
greater
defined
self.
many ways.
You wrote a whole book about it. You should get the book and...
Well, there's many ways it's defined in there too, but the way I like to define it is as your collection of your evaluations of yourself and others. So it's not just your survival, it's about who you think you are and who you think others are, and I'm smarter, they're dumber, or I'm prettier, they're uglier, those types of things.
Let's go back to what you were saying about the practical aspect. Yes, some of the processes of the self, like image making, for example, there's a function for them, there's a practical reason for them. If you had to figure things out every time, then it would be too inefficient. So at least for efficiency's sake, we need to make images, for example. But when we start making images of our wife or boss or so on, in psychological areas, then this runs into problem because the person might have changed, but we're still seeing the same image as last time. So now in terms of how to end the ego or whatever the question may be, this area of practical versus psychological, I think, is a helpful distinction. And what's really important at the root of this is to understand, as the gentleman was alluding to earlier, I think, was that the self itself, every time you have an idea of me, psychologically, if you examine this is made from thoughts, from memory. There is some activity in your mind which gives birth to this idea of the self. And so the self is really a bundle of memories. And when it's quiet, when the brain is quiet, when the mind is quiet, then there is just looking, there is just hearing, there's intelligence at work, there's awareness, but there doesn't have to be this little me, you know, as a separate entity. Because automatically, anytime, as soon as this me comes into being, there is separation from the rest, from you, from the universe.
Yes, that relates to what I said. Self-image.
Right, so the challenge is, can we live without any images, psychological images? I wish I heard this when I was 17, because, you know, as an adolescent, a teenager goes through a lot of trouble.
They're just adults.
You know, am I an adult? Am I a child? Making these images, making images of others, images of himself. But, you know, came along Krishnamurti later on, who's through this challenge of, hey, is it possible to live without any images, psychological images? Wow, explore it, find out. It's amazing. Because then you can relate, you can be, you can move through life, but don't make these images of other people. See them as they are now, instead of, you know, through the image. And this ends all the unnecessary movements of, you know, people get worked up as like saying, oh, she thinks of herself as a big shot.
That is a worthy thing to explore. You know, are my images of others helping me or hindering me?
No,
I mean, what's the value of it? If it's a completely worthless process, you know, then you say, well, you know, I'm trying to unscrew the screw with a hammer. Is that working? Maybe I should use a different tool.
Maybe I should hit it harder.
Yes! That's always the answer. Bigger, faster, harder.
Sometimes all you have is a hammer.
And sometimes, even
That's
though
where
you only
brain
have a
comes
hammer,
from.
do not use it!
That's why we can think about what
Broken off a screw
we're gonna
before
do.
a hammer.
Nice.
Because what I had.
Was that helpful?
Given the
Yep.
situation, that might be the best thing that you could have done.
Right.
But you had to decide that for yourself, possibly, or unless someone told you to do
And
that.
somebody else is too lazy to go to their toolbox and get the right tool.
Well, what
Causes
I'm
a problem.
arguing is some people,
Good point.
their mental facilities or their emotional makeup may only provide them with a hammer. And so that's what they have to work with for that type of situation.
Until they can shape their own
Or they can
tools.
go and learn new skills someplace.
Yeah,
Or
I do
exactly,
believe
the
in
blacksmith could heat that tool and forge a screwdriver from that hammer, possibly.
Have you ever met a smith who was black? All the smiths I've ever met are white. Why do they have black smiths? Never figured that one out. Did you ever, anybody know the reason for that one?
But the thing is, we're well trained for dealing
I
with
saw a movie.
hammers and screws and nails and things out there.
Was that his name?
What's
Smith though?
What's missing in a lot in
Of
our
course the guys
education
are
is
black.
awareness of what we are,
Right? Name Smith?
which happens in the mirror of relationship, right? Like we see our physical body in a regular mirror, and we can see ourselves psychologically, or what our habits are, what our behavior is, in the mirrors of relationship with other people, with nature, with books, with ideas, and so on. Because to be is to be related, right? We're always in relationship. So we can see, it's like a mirror that
We're
shows
having
us
a
what we are.
relationship right now. Oh.
We'll examine our relationship, well, not to go to the side, but one of our largest relationships is back to that basic, well, trees a very highly involved plant, but the plants don't need us,
They can eat us.
but we need them.
Yeah,
What's up
some
with that?
scientists said if all the insects are gone, the world will be gone, but if all the people are gone, the world will thrive or something.
And the plants will still thrive, yeah. Or something like that.
So when thought, just kind of wrapping it up because you know I'm sure people want to go. So when the mind learns the right place of thinking, and thought is not such a dominant force in our daily life, then we're more quiet inwardly. But this doesn't come through control. It comes from awareness, learning, order, and so on. Then there's more space for that other movement, because it's not, our lives are not so dominated with thinking all the time. And that other movement has a very beautiful perfume.
It's worth examining in your own life to see if it's true for you.
Exactly. Don't believe what I say. These are just
Can I
suggestions.
get one of your business cards?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Please send me an email. I'd love to hear from you.
He's a really good classic guitar player if you like classic guitar.